Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2023 elections which are being held across the country tomorrow, Tuesday, November 7th. Before I start, I'd like to say if you like my content, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, and also leave a like and comment. And with that said, let's get into it. So the map I have on my screen right now is the 2023 governor election map, and there are only 3 states that have or had elections this year already. The reason Louisiana is filled in is because Louisiana actually already had its gubernatorial election back in October. The way governor elections work in Louisiana is if the top candidate does not get 50% of the vote, there's a runoff that is held a couple of weeks later. So this first election was held on October 14th, and if there had been a runoff, it would have been on November 18th. But the Republican candidate, Jeff Landry, who was the attorney general, he won with 51% of the vote, so there was no runoff, and this election is done with already. It's also worth mentioning that this is actually a Republican flip. The current governor, John Bel Edwards, is a Democrat, and he was elected in 2015 and 2019, but he was term limited, and Republican Jeff Landry was elected to replace him. But despite the fact that the Louisiana governor election is over, there are still 2 more governor elections that are happening tomorrow, and both are expected to be kind of competitive. So the first governor election we're going to be covering is the Kentucky governor election. So for some background, this seat is currently held by Democrat Andy Beshear, who 4 years ago in 2019 defeated Republican incumbent Governor Matt Bevin. And as you can see here, Beshear only won by 0.4%, so it was very narrow. And because it was in 2019, that means it was in the middle of Donald Trump's presidency. And during the Trump presidency, blue waves were happening pretty much every year. Despite his narrow win, however, Andy Beshear has been very popular as governor because he's been able to portray himself as very moderate. Despite his popularity, people did expect this race to be pretty competitive because Kentucky is a very Republican state. Donald Trump won the state over Joe Biden by almost 30 points. So, taking a look at the 2023 governor election, Andy Beshear is facing Attorney General Daniel Cameron. And as I said earlier, people were expecting this race to be very competitive, but then there were polls showing Beshear with consistent and large leads. You can see here on 538 that even Club for Growth, which is a Republican internal, had Beshear up by close to double digits. However, recent polling has actually showed the race to be pretty tight. This recent poll, it is from a Republican internal, but it does have Beshear only leading by 2. And this poll from Emerson College, which actually usually has very accurate polls, in 2022 they did overestimate Republicans a little bit, but they have Cameron up by 1 point actually. And in my opinion, there are a couple possible reasons for this. The first reason is because Kentucky is such a Republican state that the partisanship of the state is catching up to this race. And I think that can be attributed to the fact that Cameron was in the low 40s, and even in this Emerson poll from last month, Cameron was in the low 30s. And now undecideds who usually vote for Republicans in Kentucky have decided to shore up for the Republican candidate for governor. So now the consensus is that this race is going to be pretty close, but what do I think about it? Well, because Beshear is so popular and because he's been leading the polling for most of this cycle, I do still think he is a narrow favorite, so I am calling Kentucky lean Democrat for this election. Ultimately, I wouldn't be surprised if Cameron was able to win this race, but right now I do think that Beshear is probably going to win by a little more than 3 points. So now we're going to move on to the other governor election in Mississippi. For some background on this one, the current governor is Republican Tate Reeves, who was elected in 2019 by a relatively narrow margin of 5 points in the state of Mississippi. And as I mentioned when I was talking about Kentucky, 2019 was kind of a mini blue wave year, so it makes sense that Jim Hood was able to outperform the partisanship of his state significantly. Moving on again to the 2023 election. Governor Tate Reeves is now facing Democrat Brandon Presley. At first, no one expected this election to be competitive at all, but then when Brandon Presley announced his campaign, everyone realized he's a very moderate Democrat and he's been able to win over Republican voters in previous elections. So then the consensus kind of shifted and people realized that this race might actually be competitive after all. So looking at the polls here, there haven't been that many polls, but some polls do show this to be a close race. Besides these 2 polls that have Reeves leading by double digits, one of which is a Reeves internal, all of the polls here have the race below a 10-point margin. This one, which is a Brandon Presley internal, actually has the race tied, but that was from back in August, so things definitely have changed since then. And this one, which is a DGA internal, has Reeves up by only 1. And that one was from only a few weeks ago. It's kind of hard to predict what's going to happen because of how little polling there is, but because Reeves won by such a small margin now and is very unpopular in the state, I do think it's possible that this race could get close. Going back to the map now, I do think that Reeves is probably going to win by a similar margin to last time, probably around 5 points, maybe a little more. So I am calling Mississippi likely Republican, but because of how uncertain I am due to the lack of polling, I do think it's possible that Brandon Presley could upset this race. So moving back onto the governor map, I do think Reeves is probably going to win re-election, probably by a similar margin to 2019. So I am calling Mississippi likely Republican. But due to the uncertainty of this race, just because of how little polling there is, I do think that it's possible that Brandon Presley could pull an upset here. So overall, I do have Republicans gaining a net of one governorship because I have Louisiana flipping and I have Mississippi and Kentucky both holding for their respective parties. But there are more elections than just these governor elections. In fact, there's a Supreme Court race in Pennsylvania too. And unfortunately, there isn't much polling out of the state of Pennsylvania for this race. I did find one, but it's kind of old. I think it's back from September. And it has the Democrat Daniel McCaffrey leading the Republican Carolyn Carluccio by 6 points. And even in this poll, they're still 22% undecided, and they could go either way. You know, most likely, I think they'll probably break for Democrats because of the post-Roe effect. But it is possible that in a low turnout election, Biden's popularity will affect it more, so I don't know. Overall, I do think McCaffrey's going to win. I think I would call this race lean Democrat if I was giving it a rating. Unfortunately, there isn't a ton of data, like I said, but I did think I would mention it since Pennsylvania is such an important state in the United States elections. And aside from the state of Pennsylvania, there's actually elections in Virginia too. This is basically the state equivalent of the midterms for Virginia. So as I'm sure we all know, 2 years ago, Glenn Youngkin was elected governor of Virginia in what some people consider an upset because he was not leading in the polls until like the last week before the election. And when he was elected, he also led Republicans to victory in the Virginia House of Delegates, which is the state equivalent of the House of Representatives. And just like the United States House of Representatives, the Virginia House of Delegates redrew its maps after the census. So now there are a couple new seats, and Republicans and Democrats are duking it out for the control of this chamber. There are also elections in the Virginia Senate, which is the state equivalent of the United States Senate. And in this chamber, Democrats actually do still have a majority. Youngkin was not able to win enough seats for them in 2021. And I don't actually know too much about the individual races in either of these chambers, but from what I understand, from what I've read, Democrats are favored in both chambers. They're more so favored in the Senate because the House of Delegates is more favorable for them, but they are favored to win both. And there are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, Youngkin is not going to be on the ballot because he's not up for re-election. In fact, Virginia governors don't even run for re-election immediately. So even though Youngkin is popular, that's not really going to have too much of an effect on these races. And taking that into account, Virginia Democrats are actually playing this pretty smart because they're not tying Republicans in the state to Youngkin because they know Youngkin is popular. Virginia Democrats are capitalizing on the fact that Virginia has been a blue trending state recently, and they're capitalizing on issues like abortion, which are more favorable to Democrats right now. Overall, it does seem like Democrats are going to take both of these chambers, but I do think that there is a chance that Republicans do keep the House of Representatives or the House of Delegates. Overall, it does seem like Democrats are going to take control of both of these chambers, but there does seem to be a chance that Republicans could win the House of Delegates in a minor upset. And if Republicans do really well, they could potentially flip the Virginia Senate, but I doubt that. So overall, in Virginia, I do think Youngkin is going to have to deal with two Democratic chambers. But that is all I really have to say about the 2023 United States elections. Overall, 2023 seems like it's going to be a pretty neutral year. If anything, it might be a little bit beneficial to Democrats, but I don't think it means much for the 2024 election. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you like my content, subscribe to the channel. Leave a like on the video and comment and let me know what you agree with and what you disagree with, and turn on the notification bell so you know when we upload. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day.